This Choircast podcast episode is brought to you by Divine Echoes, reconciling prayer with the uncontrolling love of God. How the heck does petitionary prayer work in a world where there's so much suffering and evil? Is praying for others just a religious, superstitious practice that does nothing at all except make the person praying feel better? If you are looking for a pioneering book on prayer that is thought-provoking, challenging, and endorsed by some of today's most well-known authors and scholars, then Divine Echoes is the book for you.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. I'm joined, as always, by my older and much less good-looking brother, John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
I have to.
Yeah, I know.
It's the ongoing paradigm of, brother relationships. But anyway, this is the podcast that we call This Is Not Church, because if it was church, you would have left by now. And we'd be with you, man. We understand. But we have, as always, man, we always have amazing guests. And this guest is someone I've been looking forward to talking to for some time. I really just sort of discovered her by scrolling through Facebook and realizing we had a bunch of friends in common. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. And then her new book came out. And I'm like, oh my gosh. All right. This is a conversation that we've been having variations of this conversation with a handful of people for the last probably 6 months to a year. And it's just a conversation that needs to continue to take place. And so I appreciate her bringing her unique perspective to this. So I'm going to introduce her real quick, read a quick bio, and then we'll talk about her new book. But with us today is Dr. Grace Ji-Sun Kim. Also, by the way, the foreword to her book was written by David Gashi, John.
Oh, wow. Nice.
We both love very much, and who's been on the show. So I was like, man, we do have a lot of people in common. But I'm going to read out the back of your book. So if there's anything wrong here, it'll be either my pronunciation or where there's something wrong on the book. But anyway, Grace Ji-Sun Kim, Ph.D., University of Toronto, was Professor of Theology at Earlham School of Religion in Richmond, Indiana. She's the host of the Madang, podcast, and is published in Time, Huffington Post, U.S. Catholic, and The Nation. She's an ordained PCUSA minister, and her many books, by the way, like 20, right? I mean,
24.
24, yeah. Who's counting? Goodness, I'm happy to have one, and she's 24. I'm impressed. But her many books include Invisible, Reimagining Spirit, and Healing Our Broken Humanity. She and her spouse, Perry, have 3 young adult children. They live in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The new book that we're here to talk about is called When God Became White, Dismantling Whiteness for a More Just Christianity. So without any further ado, welcome to the podcast. Grace, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much, Nat and John, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast. This is the first one where it's done by 2 brothers. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, we hope it's a good experience.
I think it will be. Already it's been good.
I make no promises. We try to keep expectations low. That's how we.
I say that
keep
to everybody. Yeah, if your expectations are low, everything is good.
That's right. I was struck by the title of your book, which again is a conversation that we've had with a few people over the last few months. But I was really struck by what I was hoping and what has proved to be true, your unique perspective on it. So coming from a Korean American background, there's a nuance there that I don't know that we get from other perspectives. So I would just like to start by asking you, maybe just give us a quick background. I know that you go over quite a bit of that in the book, but just sort of how that has influenced or informed your worldview and your theology, everything.
Yeah. So I think, when I teach, I always say theology is biography and biography is theology. So we come to know God from our own experiences. So I think, the more perspectives that we get, the better and deeper understanding of who God is that we will ever get. So that's why we need to hear white woman, we need to hear Black woman, we need to hear Hispanic man, Native Americans, etc., because their experiences are so vast and it's different from the white dominant male experience of who God is. So I think, when you were just introducing me and describing the book, I think there has been a few books that cover whiteness and maybe, God and white God or male God, but probably not so many from an Asian American perspective or an Asian American woman's perspective. I can't think of anything at this point. So I think what your point was valid, that it is a very different perspective because I bring in my own different ethnicity and culture and history, which is very different from, I think the ones that have written on this topic are mostly African Americans. And so their experience of enslavement or segregation and their experience of racism is different from mine. So yeah, I think I'm hoping that my book will be very helpful for Black people, white people, Asian American, Hispanic, Native American, because we do need all these different perspectives, language, words, and experiences to get a deeper understanding of who God is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the only other book I can think of that would come close would be Scott Okamoto, who wrote a book called Asian American Apostate.
Okay,
and
I haven't read that.
If you haven't read it, he's just a great guy. Really, very interesting book, but it's not. I say similar.
Yeah,
similar in theme, but worlds apart, like different. Yeah. So my experience having read your book now is just a lot of things I had not considered. And I love that when I read a book, when I go, okay, that's an experience I haven't had. That's an experience I would not have imagined. You talk about, one of the stories in the book was an experience with your daughter where you were trying to get off of a plane.
Yes.
And I've experienced the frustration of trying to get off a plane, but with rude people. But there was that overtone. Do you might talk about that a little bit? Just sort of walk us through that.
Yeah, sure. It happened maybe 10 years ago because she was younger and, there's that unwritten rule. You just do plane by row. That's just common sense. So we were near, I think, the fourth last row or the third last row of the plane. And it was a really big plane. It was a plane coming from Vancouver to Philadelphia. So it was a larger plane, a lot of people. And there was an elderly white couple sitting 2 rows behind us. And I knew that the feeling from them throughout the flight wasn't good. I knew that they were just upset that me and my daughter were on the plane and we weren't bothering anyone. We were probably most likely just sleeping or resting because I had just did a big talk in Vancouver and I was going home and I was exhausted. And so when we're deplaning, people just get off by row, but she decided to go walk ahead of me. So which would be 3 or 4 rows ahead of where she was sitting. She was in the back row. And then she just went even further. Maybe she got up to 5 or 6 rows ahead of me. So I just thought, this is really weird. And her husband was just back there where he was supposed to be. So she was in some rush, but you would think that they would go out together if she's in such a rush. Anyway, so finally she's off the plane and it's my turn to get up. And I said to the husband, I said, go ahead. And he said, no. And I said, no, your wife is ahead. So I said, go ahead. And he's like, no. So I said, okay. So me and my daughter walked out. We're walking out ahead of him. And she was right there at the exit out of the plane. And as soon as I came out in a really loud voice, she said, I can't believe you let the Chinese go ahead of you. So in her mind, she wanted to get out before me and she wanted her husband to get out before me. I don't know. Maybe she desired that Asian Americans are second class. We need to get out last. The white people are always going to be ahead of Asian Americans. Anyway, the tone was negative and I was so upset. I was tired. It's the last thing I wanted my young daughter to hear. She does not need to hear racist comments like that from an older woman. And I was about to explain what happened, but it wasn't necessary. The man was behind me and he just said, it's okay. And that was the end of it. She didn't say more and I didn't want to engage in the conversation. But the whole incident just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Why did she assume I was Chinese? There are so many different Asian countries and ethnicities, but the fact that she just lumped me with the Chinese. I am Korean. And secondly, she was supposed to come off the plane after me. So why make such a terrible comment? I can't believe you let the Chinese go ahead of you. So it was just an awful incident. But I include that in the book to show how whiteness is played out. This social construct where white people feel they have privilege, they are superior, they're better than other people of color. So it was inserted, and I reflect on a lot of my other experiences in my blogs and other books, but this one fit in the context of whiteness and how our image of who God is. If our image is a white male God, it really affects our behavior, or how we create laws in this country, how we think about each other. So if we continue to preach and teach that God is a white man, what it will continue to do is allow racism to occur, allow white supremacy to exist and white privilege, and the oppression of people of color globally. So I think many people are aware of it, but I was just able to articulate it from a historical and a biblical perspective.
You also talk a great deal about where that imagery comes from, because I guess as a white male, I would sit there and go, well, I don't know where it came from. It's just always been that way. And it's something that even John and I, as middle-aged white men, middle-aged, we're older than middle-aged. I mean, let's be honest. As older white dudes, we have to be intentional about how we even view our own views of God, and how much of that has been influenced and, I would say, corrupted by patriarchy and by, white supremacy and all those other things. So, but how much more so? So how does that how does it creep in? Is it an unintentional thing, or do you see it as more malicious than that?
Well, anyway, thank you for your comment of, wanting to kind of dismantle this and understanding the effect of this. I think, when people have power, you do everything you can to maintain your power, and you do everything you can to oppress those who are below you. So when we think about the emergence of Christianity, Jesus was a dark Palestinian Jew. If you visited that area, people are darker skin, darker hair, darker eyes. And so that is the image of Jesus. And that area was under the Roman Empire. It was already under the Roman Empire before Jesus was born. And the Roman Empire, I think people said it lasted until the fall of Istanbul, which was in 1462. So the Roman Empire was there for a long time. Like our modern history was under the Roman Empire. So under Roman Empire, Christianity is growing and emerging, and Constantine says, now everybody's going to be Christians. Let's all be Christians, etc. So when you have these white men as emperor over this vast area of the world, all that Mediterranean and the European, and all the way up to England and, the UK, they hold a lot of power. And to maintain that power, you uphold a white male God, because it intersects and it empowers each other. So if you create a white male God, it legitimizes the Roman Empire's emperors that, hey, they are close to God and they can continue to oppress other people and dominate, colonize, kill, and take their land. So it was intentionally done. And you say, how can that be done? Well, Mary Daly is a Catholic feminist theologian, and her famous quote is, if male is God, if God is male, then the male is God. She really was able to capture what has been happening throughout history. Because when you think about it, both Nate and John, no one has seen God. Absolutely no one. But in our Christian mind, in the artists, the painters, the stained glass window drawers, everybody paints a white old man for some reason. And so it continues to perpetuate this white supremacy, white male privilege, and white male power. Because if you continue to say that God is a white man, then it continues to feed into the notion that white male are closer to God. It's like the legacy of the popes and the bishops. Why there are no women priests allowed? Because they thought they're going to trace their lineage to Peter. And Peter was a man. And if Peter was a man, then men are closer to God. That was the reason for the Catholic Church. They kept saying men are closer to God. Therefore, only men can be bishops and popes and priests. So it happens intentionally, while many people in the pews may not recognize it, because many people in the pews just take everything as divine message and, divine order, etc. But I think we really need to critique it to make sure we understand why this is happening and to make sense of racism, which is deadly. When we think about this American history, it was built on racism. So what did racism allow? It allowed the genocide. And that was done under the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope said, yes, manifest destiny. You can take the land from non-Christians, so the Native Americans, and you can kill them. And after that, then they enslaved the Africans. So that's why racism is so dangerous. It kills, and many times in the name of God. So I think recognizing the damage of a white male God, we really need to unpack it, dismantle it, and also then search the Bible. And I do that in the book. So I search scripture and tradition to find different images of who God is.
When you mentioned that convergence too, right? That was one of those things that I thought was interesting, that convergence of, the enslavement of Africans, of them being physically against their will brought to America. You have the genocide of the Native Americans as we expand westward. There's also the absolute complete mistreatment of Asian Americans that were brought to build railroads and abused and killed by the thousands, I'm sure. But all of that under the auspices of God said we can.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Not remotely divorced from religion or from, right? I mean, this was all God endorsed.
Yeah. And white male slaveholders legitimized this whole thing, right? Bringing Africans, enslave them, buy them, and sell them, and kill them, whatever, rape them, doing all of that in the name of God, because they were quoting scripture. They said, slaves, obey your masters. It was repeatedly told. And you see, something like that can only happen if you continue to preach a white male God. If you suddenly said God is black, that would turn everything upside down and say, oh no, then that means we can't be slave owners. So that white male God has been destructive throughout Christian history. So we're only talking about U.S. soil, but it has happened in Africa and Asia, South America, genocide of people, during the Crusades, killing people who were not white, so it is very, very dangerous.
Well, and doesn't it gives us permission, right, to keep anyone who doesn't look like us in a second-class citizen type state.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, exactly. And that's the mentality of the old white woman on the plane who said, I can't believe you let the Chinese go ahead of you because we're second class or third class. How dare that they go walking off the plane ahead of her white husband? So so it legitimizes all these actions, and you think that's small, but when it's compounded on a daily basis, it adds up and it does great damage to people. So I really want those who are people of faith, those who are in the church, to recognize how harmful and damaging all this whiteness and racism is doing to people of color.
Well, and also, doesn't it, with this idea of second-class citizen, there's expectations from us as white people, what, say, an Asian person should look like, sound like, talk like, right? Yeah. And that all is built off of racism as well.
Yeah, so there is the stereotyping. So earlier you mentioned about the railroad. So now you said the Chinese were brought to build the railroad. So there were white people working, but white people were paid well and they got free meal. The Chinese were given a small fraction and then they weren't given food, so they had to buy food. And then all the dangerous work, the explosions, the dynamites, all the Chinese were forced to do it. So they were treated poorly. They were like second-class citizens. It was a terrible situation. But Asian American history is not taught in our education system. And now I was in Florida speaking. Now they're trying to get rid of African history, African American history, because to many white people, only American history is white history. So anyway, so that happened to the Chinese men. But then the woman, the Chinese woman, the Korean, the Japanese, the stereotyping was that we were used as sexual slaves. So, we were used as prostitutes, to do sexual work, etc. So that was within the American history for a long time. So present day, when women like me don't fit that mold or other women don't, people get upset because white people want us to fit in that stereotypical role where a woman, especially Asian American women, stay silent, don't speak up, don't cause any trouble, just look pretty and just gratify us sexually. That was the stereotype. And so when you don't fit that, then white people get upset and they will say to you, you shouldn't be speaking up so much. You should be quiet. You should just stay sitting down and stay pretty, etc. So those stereotypes run, and it's not just against Asian Americans. You have African Americans, Latinx, and Native Americans. All these stereotyping, the Indians, it's horrible. So we have to stop this stereotyping.
Another thing that struck me when I read it, and I haven't ever read it put this, or I haven't seen it put this way, but you talk about this notion of Asian Americans as being the perpetual foreigner. And that resonated. I'm like, you know what? At the risk of sounding like average white male guy, my sister-in-law's Korean. And I have learned a ton just from the last 25, 30 years of being in a family with her. First of all, I learned how much of my own thinking was backwards and dumb. So she's thankfully brutally honest enough to call me out when I say, early on, especially when I would say or do something dumb. But she expressed that she's the only other person I've ever heard say that until I read this in your book. It's like, no matter how many generations removed I am, I'm still perceived as a foreigner. So maybe you could talk to us about that a little bit. I thought that was very, very fascinating.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing about your sister-in-law, and I hope that she will be able to read my book one day. So it's interesting. We look different, Asian Americans. So a French person can come immigrate maybe a month ago. They are automatically, even though they have a French accent, they're welcomed as an American. While as, the history shows we were here 400 or 500 years because the Filipinos were brought over. So we've been here a long time. And then the recent immigration with the gold rush and the railroad is over 100-something years. But so we have a long history. What if an Italian, a white European who doesn't speak English, like a Spanish, it doesn't matter if they don't speak English, they are still looked upon and welcomed. Oh, you're a new American or you're an American. While as people like us, it's a perpetual foreigner. It doesn't matter. My kids will be viewed, they were born in Canada, but they'll be viewed as a foreigner. There's no way that they can be an American. And so that is done for several reasons. One, we look different. Secondly, America wants to maintain as a white dominant culture. And thirdly, if anything happens, like the pandemic that we just went through, it's very easy to blame the foreigner. Of course, they brought it over. These are the foreigners. They're horrible people. And we know Trump was a president and he used bad names and all these racialized terms. And so, there's all these reasons why it's it serves white people to continue to label us as perpetual foreigners. They are never going to be Americans. And let's always be suspicious of them. They are maybe Chinese spies or North American spies. We're going to be suspicious because we want the dominant culture to not like them, not accept them, because we need someone else to blame for the pandemic or the bad economy or why white people can't get into the top schools. Always you need somebody, a foreigner, to blame. That has been done throughout history, and you see it being played out here in the U.S.
Well, we don't have to go too far back into our history when we interned Japanese people during World War II.
Yes. Yeah.
There was
horrible.
the automatic suspicion.
Yeah.
Just because.
We were in war with Japan and Germany. And
we didn't intern German folks.
I know, because it doesn't matter. They could have come a month ago. They're still going to be welcomed as an American. So it was a horrific thing that U.S. did to the Japanese. They lost everything, and so many people died in the intern camps. It was a rough, horrible situation.
Yeah, and it's a dark spot. I mean, it's definitely a stain on our history. Although I tell you right now, there are white people in Congress right now who will defend it today, who will say, yes, it was a tough choice. We had to.
Yeah, they didn't round up Germans, so yeah.
Right. Well, and even what you mentioned about the accent, somebody with a French accent can come over and we'll fall all over ourselves because, look at that sexy French accent.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we lampoon or we caricature Asian accents and turn them into punchlines for our jokes.
Yeah. People prefer any European accent over an African or Asian American accent. Yeah, because they think they're so more intelligent. So a German with a really thick accent, they're so smart. While as our accent, we're the really uneducated people. Yes.
Well, and that was, for me, that was one of my blind spots. And I had to admit to myself was specifically with Asian people. If they had an accent, I made an assumption about their intelligence.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But here's the thing. They're speaking to me in English.
Yeah.
Because that's at least their second language, sometimes third, fourth language, right? I can barely speak English. So
that's why we need more people like both of you, because you guys understand this. Uh-huh.
Right. Well, it was one of those blind spots that I really had to okay, hold on a second here. Who's the one speaking multiple languages? It's not me.
Uh-huh.
And I'm carrying on a conversation with this person. Yeah, they have an accent, but I can carry on a conversation with them. That was a really big mind change for me that I had to go through, and to be embarrassed about my own background that I even thought that.
Yeah.
But
well, thank you so much for sharing that, because we all need to hear that so many times. Yeah. Well, thank you, John.
And the truth of it is we all have blind spots.
Yeah.
And hopefully we're doing our very best to address those and
that's why you keep reading and learning. I think, we got to not stop learning. So, then you understand your blind spots or where you may have gone wrong. I think that's great. So thank you so much for reading my book. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, before I know we're getting close to our time here with you, and I don't want to let you go before I just, in short, this idea of whiteness as a construct is something that I've heard, but I kind of wanted to get your specific take on it. This idea that biologically, there's no such thing as white. This is a social construct. So I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts as a close.
Yeah. So I think sometimes we think race is biological too. So we think, and that's how Germany, when they were in war, that's what they believed too. And so some people with bigger brains are smarter, and that's the white people versus, Asians with the smaller head. So they do this. But the thing is, it's not biological. It's a social construct. So we have to kind of remember that. And so from there, then we understand that this whiteness is also a social construct. It allows racism to play out and we shouldn't question it. It allows white supremacy to be intact, and let's not dismantle it. And white privilege, it allows white people to not think about their skin color. While as the rest of us, I have to think about I am an Asian American at all times, because I don't know if someone's going to attack me. During the pandemic, thousands of people have been attacked, many murdered. for no reason, but because we were Asian and Asian American. We were targets. And that has happened throughout history. You target Black people, Black while driving. And so this whiteness, we have to understand it's a social construct that allows white people to hold power and privilege. I think the power is a very important concept. So it allows white people to continue to hold their power, this whole concept of whiteness. And so when we're fighting racism, we also have to fight this concept of whiteness to dismantle it. So if you are a person of faith, we all want to work for justice, whatever justice it may be, economic justice, climate justice, racial justice, all these justices, and they are all intersectional. So one of my other books that I co-wrote with Susan Shaw is called Intersectional Theology. All these injustices intersect. So my ethnicity intersects with gender, with economics, everything. So I think we need to recognize this social construct of whiteness and work towards to dismantle it, which will in turn help us fight against all these other injustices, because they are all intersecting, they're all intertwined, and they all work together to continue to oppress people.
Well, and what better place to start than inside the church, which should reflect, right?
Uh-huh.
Should reflect the heart of God. Should be a place where we come and we see justice on the regular. So I appreciate so much the work you've done. I appreciate so much that you've taken the time to come and talk to us. And the book, again, is called When God Became White, Dismantling Whiteness for a More Just Christianity. We wish you just the continued success with this. I hope it just does great. And maybe we can catch up with you again sometime down the road.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much, Nat and John, for having me. This was a pleasure to share my book, When God Became White, with you and your listeners. Thank you so much.
Hey, friends, we are thrilled to share that we will be recording a podcast from Wild Goose Festival this July 11th through the 14th. Wild Goose Festival is a transformational community grounded in faith-inspired social justice. It's a one-of-a-kind gathering that brings together activists, artists, and seekers from all walks of life to explore justice, art, spirituality, and community. The festival will take place at Van Hoy Farms in Union Grove, North Carolina, and we would love for you to join us there. From engaging workshops to inspiring panels and interactive experiences, Wild Goose has something for everyone. So mark your calendars and let's be part of this incredible community that is committed to making a positive impact in the world. For more information, visit www.wildgoosefestival.org. As one of the followers, use discount code A-JON, that's A-John, and you will get $50 off the price of an adult weekend ticket. See you there.